afternoon, I want to talk to you a little bit about the evidence that we anticipate will be presented to you. And it starts on September 15th of 2016. Trooper Kenneth Velez was at home that day. And he got ready like he did every other day, kissed his loved ones goodbye, and he went to work. He worked for the Ohio State Highway Patrol, and on September 15th of 2016, he had various assignments that day. And when he kissed his family that morning and went off to do his job, he had no clue what was going to happen to him that afternoon. And around noon on that day, Trooper Velez was working a traffic detail on 90 westbound, right around the border of the Lakewood and Cleveland divide, about the 164-mile post on the highway. And he did what he often did. He pulled out his laser gun and he tracked the speed that vehicles were traveling at. And as he was doing that, he saw a vehicle that was speeding. There were a couple cars on the highway that day, normal sort of flow of traffic. And Trooper Velez was standing in the berm. And throughout this trial, you're going to see pictures of what that berm looked like. And you'll hear testimony about that berm. And you know, when we think of a highway berm, we think about this small little lane, but that's not what this was. This berm you will hear testimony of was wide enough that 3 cars could fit in it, sitting side by side. And so on that day, Trooper Velez parked his vehicle in that berm. He saw some cars speeding towards him, clocked it on his laser, and he began to flag the car over that was speeding. And how do we know this? Well, we have Trooper Velez's dash camera from that day. And you will also receive testimony from other drivers on the highway that day as to their observations. And what happened was that as Trooper Velez began flagging those cars over, he had no clue what the defendant had done minutes before he came to that portion of the highway. See, Trooper Velez never met this defendant. You're going to hear testimony about the defendant, and you're going to receive evidence that about 20 minutes before this defendant struck and killed Trooper Velez, he was at a methadone clinic at about 55th and Euclid Avenue. And that minutes before he got in his car and killed Trooper Velez, he took his dose of methadone, he got in his car, and he began driving towards where Trooper Velez was merely doing his job that day. Trooper Velez didn't know that, but you'll know that from the evidence that's presented in this trial. And shortly after noon, as the trooper stood on the highway flagging that car over, you're going to see the dash camera footage and you're going to hear the testimony. And what you're going to learn through the evidence submitted that as Trooper Velez flagged the car over, he began walking at the back of his patrol car, still well within the berm, still enough within the berm that a whole nother car could have fit on the other side of him. And you'll hear testimony that as Trooper Velez flagged the first car down, that car did what we all should do when flagged down by an officer. That car began to slow down, pull into the berm, so they could receive their ticket. But you're also going to receive evidence about what the defendant did that day, which was not what every other car out there did that day. As Trooper Velez flagged one car down, the other cars moved out of the way, slowed down, allowed the officer to do what he needed to do. But this defendant, he didn't do that. What he did was decide, because he was following too closely and he didn't have enough time to stop, that he was going to drive his car in that berm, which is not a legal lane of traffic. What this defendant decided to do was that he was going to disregard our laws and travel in a way that was beneficial to him giving no heed to anyone else. And so you're going to hear testimony and see the video and see the photos of this defendant completely inside the berm of the highway. You're going to hear the evidence from the accident reconstruction team about when this defendant finally started applying his brakes. You're going to see the skid marks that show you when it was that this defendant finally decided to slow down. And you're also going to see in that video that as this defendant drove in that berm of the highway, he struck and killed Trooper Velez about 20 minutes after he left that methadone clinic. And so through the course of this trial, you're going to hear more information and more evidence about this defendant. And you will hear, in addition to the methadone, that this defendant had gone into court and received notification that his license was suspended in Alabama. You're going to hear testimony that he received written notice that his license was suspended in Alabama. And then you're going to hear testimony and receive evidence that this defendant then chose to go into the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicle, not disclose that he had a suspended Alabama driver's license, and falsely obtained an Ohio driver's license. All before he ever met Trooper Velez. All before he got into that car on September 15th of 2016. In addition to hearing about this defendant's deceit in obtaining an Ohio driver's license, you're going to hear the observations of this defendant immediately after he struck and killed Trooper Velez. We're going to have witnesses here who did not drive into the berm of the highway, who properly stopped. And after seeing this defendant strike Trooper Velez, they called for help. They rendered aid. They did what we would expect everyone to do. And you will hear them testify in regards to their observations of this defendant. And then in addition to their testimony, you'll hear from Sergeant Gable, who was the officer on scene who administered standardized field sobriety tests to this defendant. We asked you a lot of questions in voir dire about impairment, but we also asked you about experts and listening to their testimony. You're going to hear Sergeant Gable's training and years of experience in standardized field sobriety tests. And you're going to hear and see the video of Sergeant Gable giving standardized field sobriety tests to this defendant. And you will hear from Sergeant Gable his observation of the defendant as well, and his conclusions about the defendant's impairment based on the standardized field sobriety test that he issued on scene. That is the testimony you will receive in this case. That is the evidence you will have. And so when we talk about what happened on September 15th of 2016, you'll have more information that Trooper Velez had that day. Because for Kenny, he was just going to his job that day. For Trooper Velez, he was flagging down a car to issue them a citation. It was something he had done throughout his career. Trooper Velez did not have access to the knowledge that you're going to have throughout this trial. He had no clue what this defendant had done in obtaining a false driver's license. He had no clue that the defendant had just left the methadone clinic. And he had no clue that this defendant would give reckless disregard to every traffic law and enter the berm where he should not have been driving. But you will. you will have the information that Kenneth Velez did not, because you will receive the evidence from the witness stand and have the exhibits to review. And what we would ask is that as you listen to the witnesses, as you receive the evidence, pay close attention to what they're telling you. Pay close attention to the information that you are being provided throughout this trial. Because we firmly believe that at the conclusion of our case, we will have presented to you evidence of each and every essential element, of each and every offense that this defendant is indicted for, beyond a reasonable doubt. And at the conclusion of this trial, when we have done that, we would ask you to uphold your oath, to fairly and justly deliberate. And we believe through those fair and just deliberations, after receiving the evidence, you will be able to return a verdict of guilty. Thank you.
This was a terrible, terrible, terrible accident. But at the end of the day, this was an accident. Nothing the state of Ohio brings forward over the next several weeks is going to prove that this is anything other than a tragic, tragic accident. And this accident that happened to Josh could have happened to any one of us. Josh is 38 years old. He was driving to a job that day. He's got a company. He fixes homes, does construction. Years ago, Josh fell off a roof. He went to a doctor. He got started on pain management. They gave him pain pills. And as the story goes, he got hooked on pain pills. In an effort to get off those pain pills, he started a prescription methadone. A doctor prescribes it, and a clinic gives it to him. And that methadone has no effect whatsoever on his ability to drive, and it had no effect whatsoever on this accident. You're going to hear from Josh's doctor. You're going to hear from pharmacist, toxologist, that this methadone is nothing but a red herring. It's a way to find blame when there is no one to blame. This is a tragedy. A very good man was killed, an officer of the law. He's got a family that loves him. He's got brothers and sisters in the highway patrol that care about him. And he's got a community that comes out in support of him, just doing his job that day, that this accident happened. But the government, the state of Ohio, is coming forth with the full weight, measure, and power at their disposal to try and make a crime where a crime didn't happen. We have a real disagreement about what happened here. What you're going to find is that Josh was driving on 90 West. Josh was in his lane. Josh was moving like a normal person would move on 90 West. He's making all the snap decisions that you have to make when you're on a very busy road. And you're going to learn that Trooper Velez had set up an area of enforcement, which you might call a speed trap. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is what it is. But Trooper Velez routinely set up in this particular area on 90 West. You're going to learn that 90 West is a very limited berm, a very limited space where there's not a lot of room for folks to pull over towards the middle. But somewhere past the Alger Road overpass, the Alger Road bridge there's an area where it gets a little bit wider for a car length or two. And that's the spot that Trooper Velez would sit and catch speeders. And on this day, this nice September day, Josh is driving his Hyundai Veloster. He's going to a job to put a bid in on a project, and Trooper Velez is running his radar. And he's standing outside of his patrol car in his regular uniform, and he's aiming his gun, his radar gun, at folks speeding. And then when he catches you speeding, his policy or his procedure, at least what he's done in the past, because this is an area he frequents, that he's frequented over his history of writing tickets there, what he does is he does a hand signal to the drivers and tell them to pull over. Unfortunately for Josh, and unfortunately for Trooper Velez, the individual in front of Josh's car didn't understand that hand signal. So instead of pulling over in 90 West, he stopped. He hit the brakes. He hit the brakes in traffic. And Josh, in an effort to avoid rear-ending that individual, because Josh was coming from one lane into the lane closest to the berm, and Josh is looking in his mirror, and he's looking ahead, and he's doing all the right calculations, and all the right decisions are being made. And when he sees brake lights stopping in front of him, he did what any one of us would do. He swerved to the berm. In an effort to avoid hitting the car in front of him, he could go towards traffic or go towards the berm. He went towards the berm. Little did he know, little did anyone know, that on that fateful day, Trooper Velez would be outside of his car, standing between his patrol car and the car that had stopped in front of Josh. And Josh swerved into the berm and hit Trooper Velez and killed him. Josh stopped. Josh stayed on scene. Josh did what you're expected to do. He's not a doctor or a medical person, but people jumped out of their cars and started administering aid, and Josh stayed right there, and he watched it happen. He watched it happen, and he waited for the police. And the police came, and the highway patrol came, and as you can imagine, the injuries were horrific. The injuries were horrific. Trooper Velez was not dead at that point, but he was hurt, and everybody knew it. There was blood on the streets, and Josh was right there for it, and he stayed right there for it for the hours, or at least the hour it took to stop traffic and get medical personnel, and police from everywhere stopped everything. Cleveland came, Lakewood came, finally the highway patrol came. Kenneth Velez's brothers and sisters came out there to the scene. In a decision that I may question, that you may question at some point, the Highway Patrol took over the investigation of this accident. Cleveland didn't take it. Lakewood didn't take it. The Highway Patrol took it. And folks close to Trooper Velez made the decisions in charging someone for this accident. Everybody was shook up. You're going to see video. You're going to hear that the police were shaken. You're going to hear that the witnesses were shaking. You're going to hear that the medical personnel were shaking. And you're going to hear that Josh was shaking. You're going to see Josh there on the side of the road, and you're not going to see one sign of impairment. You're not going to see a drunk. You're not going to see somebody high. You're not going to see somebody doing anything that would indicate they were impaired. And then the police are going to come out, and a trooper, who I believe is somewhat close to this accident, decides that he's going to take the lead on the investigation, and he runs Josh through some field sobriety tests, and you're going to see those. And I want you to see those. those roadside gymnastics where Josh does great. He does a walk and turn and a one-legged stand, and they look into his eyes and they move their fingers about. And they ask him to put his head back and touch his nose and pass time. And for somebody who just hit and killed someone in a tragic accident, Josh does great. He does great because he's not impaired. He took his prescription and it has nothing to do with what happened on this road. They charge him anyway. They charge him anyway. This trooper picks up all kinds of signals of different drugs of abuse. So you know what Josh does? He agrees to a blood test. Test my blood. Clean. Only thing in his blood is his prescription. The methadone that he was given by his doctor that morning. The methadone that did not infect this accident at all. But they need someone to blame because a good man is dead and there's a lot of people really, really hurting. And so Josh gets taken to jail. And Josh gets plastered all over TV. And everybody says he's drunk. And everybody says he ran from the scene. And it's all wrong. And it's been a year almost of Josh and his family walking around while everyone accuses him of being something he's not. Of doing something he's not. Of being responsible for something he's not. You hear all this nonsense about a driver's license. Here's the truth behind that you're going to hear. Josh had a valid Ohio driver's license. The full weight, measure, and force of the Ohio State Patrol and the Ohio State government and the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, through whatever means, went back and had Josh's valid driver's license taken away from him after the accident. They went back and say that he lied on a temporary permit a year ago or more when he said he wasn't suspended anywhere. But you're going to hear that the people at the Ohio DMV ran him and gave him a valid license, and he was driving around with a valid license on that day. But that's the desperation to find blame with these 10 charges. 10 charges. 4 aggravated vehicular homicides for one accident. 4. OVI, DUS, tampering with records for telling the people at the license bureau that he needed a license and following the steps they told him to take. Falsification, prohibition against certain acts. Ladies and gentlemen, that's throwing everything at the wall, and that's desperation because we need someone to blame. These folks are good folks, and they are doing a job. But there are a lot of upset people out there. People you can't go to and just say, hey, accidents happen. But you know what? No matter how tragic this is, accidents just happen. And someone's got to have the guts, after looking at all the evidence, to say, you know what? Accidents happen. This was an accident. And Josh is not guilty. Thank you.